Welcome to the deep dive. Let's start with a number. A number that should, frankly, grab your attention. 19%.
19%.
Yeah, that's the projected permanent income reduction for many societies. And it's coming within the next 26 years, all thanks to climate change. We're not talking about, a normal recession or something cyclical. This is potentially losing almost a fifth of global wealth permanently.
It's a staggering figure, and it really dwarfs some of the, let's say, more traditional forecasts we've seen.
Right, like the OECD numbers.
Exactly. They projected maybe 1 to 3.3% global GDP loss by 2060, which is serious, don't get me wrong.
But compared to 19%.
It looks almost, well, manageable, but facing an irreversible hit like 19%. The old playbook, just focusing on mitigation, it's clearly not enough anymore. We need something more. Transformative action.
Precisely. We all know reducing emissions mitigation is absolutely critical, non-negotiable, really. Yeah. But today we're diving deeper. Our mission is to unpack the three sort of crucial and interconnected responses humanity is actually deploying right now.
Okay.
There's the immediate on-the-ground stuff adaptation. Then there's a pretty surprising behavioral shift using virtual reality.
Ah, the VR angle. Interesting.
And finally, the really controversial one, the last resort plan to, well, actively manage the planet's climate. Geoengineering.
Right.
So by the time we're done here, you listening will understand these potential solutions things 99% of people probably haven't even heard discussed in this way.
Yeah, we're essentially looking at 3 layers. How to survive the changes already happening, that's adaptation. How to fundamentally change our behavior, potentially with tech, like VR, the transition piece. And then how we might try to manipulate the environment itself if things get truly desperate. That's geoengineering. Buying time, perhaps?
Okay, let's start with the human cost right now. The sources, they paint a pretty stark picture. Displacement.
Huge displacement.
We're looking at climate-induced migration. The projections are between 88 and 121 million people moving by the 2050s.
Million, yeah.
The sources are calling this potentially the largest movement of people in recorded human history.
And that sheer scale, I mean, it just underscores why adaptation isn't optional, it's urgent.
Totally.
But the key insight here, I think, isn't just patching things up. It's realizing that effective adaptation has to be a really rigorous, systematic process. It's not a one-and-done project.
Okay, so what does that systematic process actually look like? What makes it work?
Well, it really boils down to 4 key pillars, non-negotiable pillars.
Okay.
First, you absolutely need clear climate risk assessment. You have to know exactly what you're up against.
Understand the threat.
Precisely. Then you need robust policy planning. Think like Germany's 2024 strategy. They've got 180 specific measures laid out, very detailed.
Wow, 180.
Yeah. And then, critically, you need disciplined implementation, actually doing the things you planned. And finally, continuous evaluation. You have to keep checking. Is it working? What needs adjusting? Adaptation fails if you treat it like a static checklist. It's iterative.
And when those systems work, when they click, the results can be, well, life-saving immediately. I found this detail in the sources. It was kind of astonishing. In India, during Cyclone Dana, they combined proactive prediction, knowing it was coming, with really timely evacuation. A solid early warning system in action.
And the result?
0 casualties.
Wow. 0.
0 deaths from a massive cyclone.
Yeah.
That's incredible proof of concept for good adaptation planning, isn't it?
It really is. It shows the power of, good logistics, good foresight. But it's not just top-down planning either. Success has to be community-driven too.
How so?
Well, look at Kenya. They use something called participatory scenario planning. Basically, workshops where communities get together.
Right.
And they collaboratively figured out, okay, droughts are getting more frequent, so let's plant short-season crops. Let's manage our livestock differently. When the solutions come from the ground up, directly meeting local needs, the success rates just shoot up.
That makes sense. And it feels like sometimes the best solutions aren't the super high-tech, expensive ones. They're natural.
Exactly. We pour billions into concrete seawalls, right?
Yeah.
But the sources really emphasize that natural systems, coastal wetlands, mangroves, they often provide better storm protection.
Better than concrete.
Often, yes. More resilient, self-repairing sometimes. Look at Odisha in India. After that devastating 1999 cyclone, They focused on enhancing their mangrove coverage.
Yeah.
And it significantly reduced the community's vulnerability to high winds and later storms. It's about working with nature, not just trying to overpower it.
Ecosystem-based adaptation, right?
That's the term. And it's key because it often addresses the root causes of vulnerability, like degraded landscapes, making communities more resilient in the long run, not just patching a hole.
Okay. So we know we can protect people on the ground with smart policy, early warnings, working with nature. That's adaptation. But if we can save millions that way, how do we tackle the bigger problem? How do we change the collective behavior that's actually causing the damage in the first place? We need something that shifts psychology, right? At scale.
And that's where the sources point to a tool you might not immediately think of for climate change.
Which is
virtual reality.
VR. Okay. So not just for gaming anymore.
Not at all. It's being explored as a really potent tool for environmental consciousness. The key idea here is something researchers call psychological distance reduction.
Psychological distance reduction. Okay, break that down.
It basically means shrinking the gap between an abstract problem, ice caps melting thousands of miles away, and my own actions right here, right now.
Making it feel real.
Exactly. The immersive nature of VR, it makes these big abstract things like climate change or deforestation feel immediate, personal, tangible almost.
Is there evidence this actually works?
Yeah, there is. Research from Stanford's Virtual Human Interaction Lab, for instance, shows that VR field trips about climate change, they're way more effective for learning and changing attitudes than just, say, watching a video or reading about it.
Why is that, do you think, just the immersion?
Immersion is huge, but it's also about embodiment. Some studies have people virtually embody animals in threatened habitats or explore a coral reef that then degrades before their eyes. And this increases what they call inclusion of nature and self-concept. Basically, you start to feel that connection to the environment much more personally. And that feeling is what can drive changes in your decisions, your behavior.
Okay, I can see how that works on the consciousness level, but how does VR translate into, actual reduced impact?
Right, that's the next step. This shift in consciousness can lead to what some are calling the zero carbon substitution economy.
Substitution. Meaning VR replaces real-world activities.
Potentially, yes. Think about high-impact stuff we do now. International business travel. Could a lot of that be replaced by highly immersive virtual meetings?
Maybe. Tourism.
Tourism, exploring fragile ecosystems virtually instead of physically tromping through them. Even things like shopping.
Virtual shopping, how does that help?
Well, if virtual browsing and try-ons become good enough, maybe it reduces the need for huge physical retail spaces, all the associated energy, the excess packaging, the complex shipping logistics.
Okay, I see the potential chain reaction there. Are companies actually doing this? Reducing emissions with VR?
There's early evidence, yeah, particularly in training. Some industries are finding that VR training programs are not only effective, sometimes more effective, but they also cut down significantly on travel-related emissions for trainees and instructors.
But there's got to be a catch, right?
Yeah.
What about the environmental cost of VR itself? All the headsets, the servers?
Absolutely. That's the critical counterpoint. The materiality question, let's call it.
Okay.
Manufacturing VR hardware needs rare earth elements. It creates electronic waste. The whole system uses energy.
So the net benefit isn't guaranteed.
Exactly. It only works out if the substitution effect, all the flights not taken, the goods not shipped, the buildings not built, truly outweighs the environmental cost of making and running the VR systems themselves.
And where the power comes from.
Crucially, the whole VR infrastructure has to be powered by renewable energy. Otherwise, you're just shifting the emissions burden, not solving it.
Right. Okay. So I've got adaptation on the ground, VR potentially shifting minds and behaviors. What's the third path? The controversial one.
Geoengineering. This is the final frontier, really. The break glass in case of emergency option, actively trying to manipulate the global climate system.
Playing God, some might say.
That's certainly how it's often framed, and it broadly breaks down into two main approaches.
Okay.
First, there's CDR carbon dioxide removal. This is about physically pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. Think giant machines like direct air capture with carbon storage, DCCS,
Oh, great.
or enhancing natural processes like rock weathering.
Sucking carbon out. Got it. What's the second type?
SRM, solar radiation management. This isn't about removing CO2. It's about cooling the planet by reflecting more sunlight back into space before it warms us up.
No. Like giant space mirrors?
Less sci-fi than that, mostly. The main proposal is stratospheric aerosol injection, basically, putting fine reflective particles high up in the atmosphere, mimicking the cooling effect of large volcanic eruptions.
Okay, wow. Let's talk scale, though. Take CDR sucking carbon out. How big an effort are we actually talking about?
Mind-bogglingly big. Get this. Just to capture 25%, only a quarter of current U.S. emissions by 2050.
Yeah.
The CDR industry would need to capture, transport, and store about 2.5 times more CO2 by volume than the entire current U.S. oil industry produces.
2.5 times the oil industry.
By volume managed, yes. And it would mean building something like 60,000 miles of new pipelines just for CO2 transport in the U.S. alone.
That's planetary scale industrial development.
It is. The scale is almost hard to comprehend. And then there's SRM, the solar dimming idea. The peril there is profound.
How so? Seems simpler, maybe?
Maybe simpler to deploy initially, but the consequences? While the models do suggest SRM could reduce overall global warming, the sources are really clear. The effects would be incredibly uneven across the globe.
Uneven cooling.
Uneven cooling, yes. And critically, altered precipitation patterns. Rainfall could decrease in some regions, increase in others. You'd essentially be creating regional climate winners and losers.
Trading one set of problems for another, potentially.
Precisely. And pushing complex ecosystems towards entirely new, unpredictable tipping points. We just don't know the full consequences of artificially tweaking the planet's thermostat like that.
Okay, let's circle back to carbon capture, the CDR part. It sounds appealing, clean up the mess. But you mentioned side effects, hidden costs. What are the sources saying about the downsides we don't often hear about?
Right, it's not a perfect solution by any means. First off, there's the energy penalty. Meaning the capture process itself uses a lot of energy. Depending on the technology, it increases the fuel needed for, say, a power plant by somewhere between 13% and 44%.
So you need more energy to clean up the energy production.
Exactly. You're making the system more energy intensive overall just to capture the carbon from it.
But wait, there was something else in the sources about the chemicals used, something concerning.
Yes. That's kind of the hidden bonus fact, or maybe the hidden danger.
Okay.
Many capture systems use amine-based chemicals to scrub the CO2 out of flue gases or the air. The problem is, these amine compounds can degrade, and when they do, they can form other chemicals in the atmosphere. Specifically, things like nitramines and nitrosamines.
Which are?
Carcinogenic.
Oh, so the stuff we use to clean the air could create airborne carcinogens.
That's the risk. You could be trading one major public health risk, climate change impacts, for another, more direct one, air quality issues, cancer risk. It's a serious concern.
And it's not just potential chemical risks, right? The infrastructure itself. That pipeline figure, 60,000 miles, is transporting all that captured CO2 safe.
That's another major issue. CO2 under high pressure, especially in its supercritical state for pipeline transport, is dangerous stuff. It's an asphyxiant.
Has there been an incident?
Yes, very much so. In 2020, there was a major CO2 pipeline rupture in Satartia, Mississippi.
What happened?
It released a huge cloud of CO2. Over 40 people were hospitalized, many with respiratory issues, disorientation. Around 300 people had to be evacuated. It showed very clearly that the risk isn't just theoretical. Transporting CO2 at this scale carries immediate, significant safety risks for communities along the routes.
Wow. Okay. So huge scale, energy penalties, chemical risks, transport dangers. This all leads to a massive question, doesn't it? Who decides?
That's arguably the most critical issue of all with geoengineering, the governance vacuum.
Meaning nobody's in charge.
Pretty much. There is currently no comprehensive, agreed-upon global framework, no international treaties or bodies regulating geoengineering research, let alone deployment.
So who could deploy it?
That's the scary part. Especially for some SRM techniques, the cost could be relatively low compared to, say, decarbonizing the global economy.
Right.
Low enough that a single nation, maybe even a wealthy individual or corporation, could potentially decide to just do it unilaterally.
Without international agreement?
Potentially, yes. And that opens up a Pandora's box of geopolitical risks. What if one country's SRM deployment negatively impacts rainfall in a neighboring country? It could lead to conflict. The potential for unintended global consequences triggered by unilateral action is enormous.
And beyond conflict, there's an ethical issue too, right? The moral hazard.
Exactly. The big fear is that geoengineering, especially SRM, could be seen as a technological quick fix, a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Making us lazy about cutting emissions.
Precisely. It could reduce the perceived urgency for the essential fundamental work of reducing greenhouse gas emissions at the source. The IPCC, the main climate science body, explicitly warns against relying on geoengineering as a substitute for deep emissions cuts. We risk fooling ourselves into thinking we've solved the problem when we've only masked a symptom, potentially creating worse problems down the line.
Okay, so we walked through these three paths: adaptation, the VR transition, geoengineering. We pull all this together, looking at the sources. What's the overall synthesis? Where should the focus really be?
Well, the consensus emerging from the research seems pretty clear. The most successful and probably the most equitable path forward involves integrating all these approaches to some degree.
But with priorities.
But with very clear priorities. The overwhelming emphasis needs to remain on 1, rapid and deep emissions reductions. That's paramount. And 2, scaling up adaptation strategies, especially those that work with natural systems.
Like the community planning in Kenya or the mangrove restoration in Odisha.
Exactly. Those kinds of approaches, community-based adaptation, ecosystem restoration, they tend to be more sustainable, more equitable, and carry far fewer risks than relying heavily on large-scale, high-risk, potentially unpredictable geoengineering technologies.
Right. So for you listening, you now have a clearer picture of these three major paths forward. There's the resilient ground game, adaptation, building defenses, working with nature. There's the potential shift in consciousness, maybe accelerated by technologies like virtual reality, changing how we think and consume.
The transition piece.
And then there's the dangerous Hail Mary, geoengineering, the planetary scale interventions with huge unknowns and risks. The transformation is definitely happening. Climate change is forcing our hand. The real choice seems to be about how we guide that transformation wisely, acknowledging the trade-offs or not.
And that raises one final crucial point, I think. Who bears the risks, both from climate change itself and potentially from these large-scale interventions like geoengineering? Overwhelmingly, it's indigenous peoples and vulnerable communities in developing nations. They're on the front lines of climate impacts, and they're also likely to face the greatest harm from unintended consequences of things like SRM altering weather patterns.
If they have the least say in the decisions being made.
Precisely. They have the least voice in these global decision-making processes. So maybe the most important question for the future is, whose voices do we actually prioritize when we start talking about actively managing the planet? The answer to that could determine everything.
That's a powerful thought to end on. And, we've really only scratched the surface today, especially on the governance and the resource side of things.
Absolutely. The materials needed alone are a huge topic.
Which brings us to next time. We're going to dive deep into the global scramble for the very materials that power this transition. The rare earth elements needed for VR headsets, for wind turbines, for those CO2 capture machines.
The bottleneck minerals.
Exactly. Which single nation seems to hold the key to this entire environmental transition? And more importantly, what are they doing with that incredible leverage? You won't want to miss that deep dive. Make sure you subscribe so you catch it.